Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Qdabra's weekly webinar. This is Patrick, and happy to see so many people here today. This is our second preview. Actually, I was hoping to make it our second and final preview, but I've got a few minor things I'll show you next week at the same time. All of the stuff that we're demoing today will also be featured in our training class next week and with labs, so you'll be able to get documentation on how to actually do what you see here. Before we get started with the demos, let's just do a quick poll here and just check and see how many people were here last week. I know that I see some familiar faces. I obviously see some people that are new, and I want to welcome you to our webinar. It looks like we're at about 2/3 of you were here last week, so thanks for that quick question. So we're doing training next week on FormsViewer, and that includes InfoPath Designer, the FormsViewer Designer to replace InfoPath. I'll talk a little bit more about FormsViewer at the end, but we have a solution for your current investment in InfoPath that's actually better, and it's faster. It's got a lot of features. I'm demoing some of the new features to extend your forms. We have a limited class size, so we're pretty close to being full right now. So if you've got an interest in the free training next week, please go to our website, click Education, register, and love to see you in the class. If not, you can just watch this preview. So FormsViewer is really the future of your forms. It's the only solution out there today that allows you to quickly take your InfoPath form and migrate it and add all these new features. So last week we showed you the green. We showed a bunch of new features, and this week we're doing the yellow. And actually, the training is going to cover these items, these extended features. And what I've done here is I've added kind of the pro, why you'd want to do this. Generating a GUID is important, and we'll see this today in the demo. And obviously, I'll go back to this slide probably to recap. I'm also going to show how to refresh the form from a list today. So there's a two-way connection, and I'm actually going to show how to do data analysis with Google. So we're going to send a receipt image to Google. We're going to get text back. We're also going to use Twilio to authenticate the expense report approval process. And we're going to show you the dashboard with the overlay. So lots of really cool stuff today. Let's get started with the demo. So if you've got questions, please post them. We'll be answering them throughout this webinar. And I am taping it as well. So if you are watching via YouTube, you can always send us email, support@qdabra.com. So let's go to our site. So we have a consulting site here that where I've deployed the form. I have a library. So this is just a generic form library in 365 running, and you can see I've already filled out some test forms. We're going to just walk through the demo first, and then I'll show you how we did what we did. So this is the same expense report from last week. You can see it's got that responsive design for people with mobile. It does scrunch a bit on the right there. You can see the receipt. There's a layout issue with the receipt right now. I need to fix that, but you can kind of get the idea of how this thing behaves. And the benefit, as I mentioned last week, is that mobile devices have high dots per inch. They have very high resolution. And if you use a stock InfoPath form services, it's not going to show well. So we have this mobile technique that we showed last week. If you're interested in that, take a look. So we're going to meet with our partner. We are partners with Formotus, and Adriana and I get together once a month. Adriana's I'm going to call this entertainment, I guess. So we're going to go to, where is my form? Sorry. We're going to go to happy hour. Hurrah. And then we're going to do this, let's just say we're going to do it at Rococo Coffee. So we're not going to get too inebriated, we'll be caffeinated by the end of this. And let's say it's going to be $27. And let's attach a receipt. So I've actually got a receipt here for a, I actually purchased some coffee. I could get a Starbucks receipt or a Rococo receipt and throw that in here, but I'll just use this receipt for now to show you the OCR. We can obviously add multiple items here. If I have a Uber autonomous vehicle need, autonomous delivery of humans, and we'll just throw this in here. I don't have a receipt for this. If the thing is over $75, I think we require a receipt. You can see it's red now, so we got validation of the form. But if it's $74, it won't. That's a pretty expensive Uber ride. But anyway, so I got the form. I'm going to submit it to get my expense report approved. Now I've got a couple of different options here. I can do submit and new, or I can just do submit. Submit and new, as we saw last week, it clears the form to allow me to submit to very quickly. I also have a policy statement here, and this policy statement is actually pulling the policy in from a separate library. So if I, for example, change the policy to Japanese, you'll see that dynamically is querying that and pulling that in. This is a really cool technique to dynamically pull in data. They're very useful when you're dealing with contracts and things like that. We're using it here for our expense report policy. Obviously, doesn't change the text here, but we could do that as well, and we've shown that in the past. So I'm going to go ahead and click submit. And when I do that, it's going to actually send the image to Google for processing. It's going to submit the expense items to a list, and we'll see those expense items show up in this list right here. If I hit refresh, you can see I'm up to 153. If I hit refresh, it should give me a couple more items here. There they are. And I can actually go in here and I can change one of these. And we've actually modified this list to open in FormsViewer as well. So this is just a typical customized list form. And we're opening this in FormsViewer. And I'm just going to change this cost to 77 and see if it refreshes next time we open the real report. Okay, so that's the list form, right? We are also submitting the attachments and the images and whatnot to a library. So we're actually extracting all the attachments, and we're generating a PDF of the form. We showed this last week. So this PDF here is a copy for auditing purposes of the form I just submitted. So obviously the 77 doesn't show in the PDF because we capture the PDF before we actually modified the list form. So I just got an email. I'm going to go to my email and show you the form was successfully submitted. That's good. And now it's read-only. But if I click on View Receipt, it's going to actually show me that receipt, and it's going to show me the Google OCR. So we actually sent this to Google, and Google didn't get it perfect. It did actually, PayPal is I'll show you the image in a second here, but let's actually do it right now. So if I go to the image that I uploaded, my receipt that is, then you can see that here's the receipt. And you can see here that it's just a PayPal receipt. And I bought some coffee, and I'm just using that receipt for the purpose of this demo. But you can see that the OCR got a lot of it, including my personal information. And in fact, it even got stuff like the coffee, although there are some bugs, right? So it thinks it's 160 Z's, not 16 ounces, and it didn't get the 2 right. But this is actually pretty clever OCR because it allows you then to search for things from SharePoint. And obviously it's not perfect, right? But it's good enough for a lot of things. So let's go ahead and take a look at email. So I've got my email. The person who created the workflow is a Curvy, and we haven't actually changed it to send from a more generic account. It's sending from her email. But you can see here it's $101, and that does not include the updated list item. This is the initial submit. But if I open this via text, what it's going to do is it's going to open the form, and it's going to then send me a text message, and it's going to require that I type in the text message to authenticate myself and approve the form. So I'm the manager of myself in this case, and I just got the text code on my cell phone. You can see that it did update the amount to 104 based on the list item, so it actually pulled in that list update that we made. I can click on View to see the OCR text, I think. Maybe there's a bug there. There's no OCR text for Uber because there's no receipt, but if I click on the Rococo one, you can see there's the OCR text, and I might want to verify that against what they said they spent, which was not the same amount. And let's just open my phone again. So the text was 9.4. Now, if I type in something that's wrong, it's going to say the code you entered is incorrect. So we've got about 90 seconds, I believe, to confirm this. And now it's actually going to approve it. So we have my phone number in the list, so it knows who to text. And I'll show you this in the form in a second. I just want to go through the demo first. Okay, and now it's approved. So now actually, if I go in and change the list, it won't update, so it's locked down. So that's our kind of quick demo. There's a few other things I want to show here. One of them is the dashboard. So we are showing a dashboard today. Actually, this is the wrong form. Let me go back to the dashboard. I don't believe we've published it to a library. It's just in FormsViewer. But let's take a look at it. The dashboard technique is querying a library, a list, and it's showing you all the items. It's kind of like a view in SharePoint. But the nice thing about this is we're using FormsViewer and InfoPath Designer to create this, and you can see that it gives us a nice overlay. So, and you get some of this, there is some functionality in SharePoint to do this, but one other thing that's kind of cool is this ability to list things, to filter things in the background. And this is actually something new that we did. So we've done this recently for a customer, and this is a very cool technique because it allows you to sort of restrict or to zoom in on just the items that you want to see, and then we're using an overlay to display the details for that as well. So the overlay form, this is all done in InfoPath, believe it or not, with FormsViewer, but it's only possible to do this with FormsViewer because of the customized CSS behind it, and I'll show that in a second. And let's see, I think that's it for the quick demo run through. Let's see, what did I miss? Oh, Microsoft Flow. So let me just show you the flow real quick. So the flow is pretty standard. It's just sending an email notification. So this is the flow that you just saw. We love flow, we love Power Apps, but there are certain things that Power Apps can't do. They just released, by the way, a new version of Flow that supports, and Power Apps that supports the common data model. So that's really looking forward to getting into that. That's been something we've been waiting for a long time. But here you can see that when it's submitted, it's just checking to see if it's submitted, and if it's yes, then it sends an email to the manager. If it's approved, it sends 2 emails, one back to the submitter and one to accounting, which is Janice. If it's rejected, it sends email back to the submitter. So it's pretty standard. Once the thing's paid, it also says you've been paid, and it sends email to the submitter, I believe. So that's pretty standard. What's interesting about this flow is that we're actually including a link here to open the form. And as you saw in the text message or the email message, these links open the form anonymously. So you're on the road, you're driving, you want to approve something via text. You just click on the link. It's going to text your phone, and then you just switch back to the browser and you approve it with your code. So this allows us to do authentication for people anonymously, even if they don't have a login. So that's really cool. And then, of course, we provide the PDF as well, so that if someone wanted to review the expense without logging in, they could do that as well. So they could take a look at the expense report that was previously captured. So I'm going to show how we did this, but first, are there any questions on the demo? Okay, so I'm going to switch back to the form. So this is the form actually. This is the designer form. Let's take a look at the other one first. We've demoed most of these techniques before. The overlay technique is new in the sense that it's automatically filtering, and that's really clever. But aside from that, most of the techniques like the integration with Google OCR has been demoed before. Let's just take a look at that. For those of you who are wondering, is it really calling Google? How do we know? We actually have a submit button here with a lot of rules on it. We're consolidating the common rules underneath form logic. So if we scroll down here to form logic, you'll see that we have all the common actions are stored here, so that when something is submitted, we'll run these rules here. These are the common rules, and one of those rules is to process the OCR. So the process OCR is actually running process OCR, which is we have to process the images for every single item in the view. So we might have more than one receipt, right? So we need to process all of them. So what we do here is we set this value, process OCR, equal to true, and then it runs a rule per image to process them. And it's once again running, it's calling process image, which is in the Google Vision API here. And what process image does is basically three things. It converts the XML data from the form into a format that Google can understand, which is JSON, and it's using it's basically, we have an XML to JSON command in qRules that allows you to do that, and then it just calls it makes a request to Google, and it sends this. You can see there's the Google API right there, googleapis.com. And we have our own API key in here. I'll remove this before I send you the form here, but you'll need to create an API key with Google. It's a 1-minute process, but it's making that call with our API key. So we actually set up an API key on load, and we're hard coding it in the form. And it sends it to the Google Vision is the name of the API we want, and it sends the data that we just converted. And then it has to convert the response. And once again, we've got a command in qRules that converts from JSON to XML, and that's actually then mapping it into the main data source so we can actually verify that it did process the image. So that's all done with no code. Now you could say, well, Patrick, there's some tricky rules there. You bet. It's tricky to do, but you can do it. It took Jimmy an hour last night to add this to this form. So it's not hard. We're doing a lab next week on this. So if you're interested in the training class, do sign up. We'll show you how to, and it's not just Google. Let's take a look at the other one. So when we submit, we're doing the OCR processing, right? Because you kind of figure people hit submit, they're going to go get their coffee or whatever. They don't care if it takes 10 or 15 seconds, because it does take a little longer to do the OCR processing. But we don't want to necessarily do the text message on submit, because they may not approve the form for a day or two. And the text message is time sensitive. So we only want to send them a text message if the form is open from the start. So let's take a look at the rules on open. And these rules are attached to our Qdabra rules data source. You can see here that one of those rules is to set those Google APIs. So you can see here, there's our API key that we're setting for Google. Obviously, we're going to remove that before we send it to you, so you don't play with our account and charge a whole bunch of image processing to it. Well, we will, but no big deal. Anyway, so we get that, and then down below here, if you see this, I think it's the run approval process. This is actually setting this approval process in, once again, our common rule area. A lot of rules in this form. And so it sets this start approval process, and then what it does, there's this send approval code, which is yet another field that sends the code to Twilio. And the way we're doing this, let's see if I can get this right here. Trigger send SMS. So we actually, I just looked at this, but it's in the Twilio API. So if you go into Twilio, we're using Twilio as our API engine in front of the text messaging. We have this command to, once again, we're building the request body, so we're actually creating a text. We have to create a special format for Twilio when we do this, and then we actually just send the message by doing that make request. So we're using the same make request command that we used for the Google APIs, and you can see there's the API at twilio.com, and the account ID and so on, and the request body. So once again, no code involved, but some slightly tricky rules to set it up. But once you get it working, it's fine. A lot of these APIs out there on the web are JSON based, and FormsViewer supports JSON, so that's really important. The other thing I think I should show you here is on the policy stuff. What we're doing is we have on the policy view a way to dynamically load the policies, and we're just doing that based on this drop down here. So it's a very simple command. It's called change connection URL. So this is another command that FormsViewer adds via qRules, and it's actually allowing you to update the connection for that policy to the XML that they've selected. So this is just listing all the languages that are available, and then it loads it. So when it updates the XML, and then it loads it again, and that has the effect of showing a different policy because this is coming from that policy secondary data source. Those are very, very cool technique for dynamically updating a data connection, something that you can't do out of the box with InfoPath, but you can with FormsViewer and InfoPath. That's what we're saying. FormsViewer is the future of InfoPath. It's the only zero to low cost migration path out there. So let's take a look at our deck again here. So what did I just show? Just to refresh myself here, we're hoping to show we didn't show the get input parameter, but let me show you what's going on there with the text. So these messages here all have, if you can look at this, they have some parameters at the end of them. So if I copy the link into Notepad, you'll see that they've got these parameters at the end. So in this case, the manager GUID. So we're generating a manager GUID, and we're kind of using that for semi-secure verification. Now, somebody could still get this link somehow. Maybe they couldn't see my email, but they could, maybe they could overlook on my desk and they could see it. So we have that extra step of text message authentication in the case where it's anonymous. And this is app only equals true means that this is in anonymous mode. We're also passing parameters on for approval, which is different than the reject one. So the reject one, if we copy this link, will have a very similar, but it will have rejected here instead of approved. So we're passing these parameters in the URL, and what that means is the form opens and it pre-approves or pre-rejects it. Of course, it asks for the text message if it's anonymous. So the non-anonymous link looks like this. So it's got the same manager GUID in there, and this one's going to open. It's going to require login, and it's going to authenticate via login. So if it's not anonymous, we don't do the SMS text. So that's an input parameter technique. And if we look back at the form on open, once again, it's all of those rules are going to be on open here. It's going to get the input parameters right here. So it's actually getting all of those input parameters right here, the manager GUID, the API GUID, the status, and so on. So those are all loaded or set on load based on what's in the URL. And if we look at the form in the browser, if we look at the debug screen here, you'll see all those commands running. So we're actually in the anonymous mode, we can't get the user's profile information, so that's failing. We're loading the mobile resource so that the responsive design looks good. We're checking to see if the list items have changed at all, and if they did, we pull them in. We're encoding some stuff for Twilio that's needed to encode some data for them. And then we try to get the user's information and it fails, but we're getting all these input parameter keys. So we're getting the approval, we're getting the manager GUID, and so on. Some of these fail because we don't have them in the URL, but you could actually approve it with a comment from the URL as well. And then this tells us that it's anonymous, and we encode again for Twilio. I'm not sure exactly why we're doing that, but we make the request to Twilio because we know we have to text them now because it's in anonymous mode, and you can see there's the request. And then when I opened it, I approved it, which submitted the items again to SharePoint, and believe it or not, it's running the Google API again. We don't have to do this probably on the second submit, so this is something that's right now it's not needed. And the create SharePoint folder failed because it already existed. So you can see all the rules running there on when the form opens. It kind of gives you an idea of the complexity of this solution. But this is not that hard. I mean, we did this solution basically in 2 or 3 weeks of time, and it probably took a total of less than 30 hours. And it's the expense report form, it's the dashboard, it's the policy stuff, and a bunch of other things. Let's take a look at the dashboard. This overlay technique is really cool. Let me just show this again here for those of you who may not have been watching earlier. Here's the dashboard. If we go in and make this blank, you'll see that it automatically shows all of the items in the dashboard. I can click on one to get the details. So it's popping this up with the background there, and I can dynamically filter the results. And this is not so interesting for this small list, but when you have a large list, it's really cool. And it's really fast. And this technique is something that is new today. The way we do it is in InfoPath, we have these 2 sections here, and these 2 sections are both bound to one group node, and they have different rules on them. So if the overlay is equal to search, if it's not equal to search, we hide the search one. If it's not equal to details, we hide the top details one. And then what's happening under the covers is we actually have a little bit of JavaScript that is allowing us to display those overlays. And so once again, FormsViewer allows you to extend your forms with not only custom CSS, but with a little bit of JavaScript. The custom CSS is not supported in InfoPath Form Services. We had a customer ask yesterday about that, and I'm sorry to say that this is the mobile responsive design is only something that you can do with FormsViewer. And the reason for that is that the view needs to be re-updated, and when you're in InfoPath Form Services, the view is locked. But with FormsViewer, it's not. It's dynamic. Okay, so I think I'm going to go back to my slide deck. I'm actually kind of rounding out my demo here. We did show the get user profile by name information. It's loading that. We showed the get input parameter. You saw the GUIDs, the globally unique IDs, getting set for the manager ID. I didn't show you how they're generated, but it's very simple. It's generate GUID is the command, and you can try to find that in the sample I send. The change connection URL is what we use for the dynamic policy switching. We showed the refresh SharePoint list command. We showed that the data was pulling 2 ways. It's pushing it to the list, and it's pulling it from the list when it changes. We showed the image getting sent to Google with the OCR text as a result, and that was a PNG image, right? Not a PDF, which could have text in it. It was actually a PNG image. And we showed the text message getting sent to Twilio and me typing in the 4-digit text to prevent unauthorized approvals from cell phones. And we also showed the launch dashboard, which is this overlay view technique. So the stuff that we didn't show is in blue here. I am going to be doing the training next week from 9 to 12 p.m. Pacific, but we also have a webinar next week. And Qdabra and Jennifer Lindsay have agreed to do a webinar, and they're going to show an Excel report based on a SQL database. and Qdabra is also going to talk about Power BI. So if you've got time for next week's webinar, you'll see how to do Power BI on data that was submitted from FormsViewer Forms, InfoPath. You'll also see how to do it in Excel 2016. There's some really cool techniques that Jennifer Lindsay's been creating to show these wonderful charts for manager types who want to see how the process is operating. So once again, the training course next week, we've got slides, we've got demos, you've got lab. If you need help during the class, it's only 2 hours, 2.5 hours. So I highly encourage you to attend if you have time. Any questions for me? And no questions, it looks like. You guys are sleepy. I thought I was sleepy. But if you do have questions and you see this on YouTube, then go ahead and send us an email, support@qdabra.com. Looks like we have one person questioning or commenting here. Who's that? Brian. Brian, great to have you back here, and thanks for paying attention and saying you're not asleep. I didn't mean to say everyone was sleepy, but it is a very sleepy day in Seattle with overcast rain here. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Once again, FormsViewer is your migration path for InfoPath. It is the lowest cost solution by far, by 2 orders of magnitude, when you compare to Nintex or K2 or to Power Apps even, because with Power Apps you're going to have to rewrite all your solutions, and they're not going to support document-centric forms. They never will because it's list-centric. I mean, Power Apps is cool for certain things, and they're actually adding more features there. So there's actually more and more terrain that Power Apps will cover. But the bottom line is, if you've spent a lot of time developing your current solution, you'd have to recreate it in Power Apps, and that's not a zero cost. So with FormsViewer, you take your form, you load FormsViewer app, you're done. It's literally a few minutes. There are a few things that we don't support. You can go to our webpage to find out, but there's so much more that we add. Faster browser, all those commands I showed you today, that's all new stuff that you can do. And it's unlimited, so you can connect to any of those APIs out there on the web. Once again, training's next week. Hope you all have a great day. Thank you.